please with the Stephanie, are you here to?
Hi, yes, this is Stephanie Moore with the Louisville Zoo. I apologize, I was having some technical issues and could not get on.
No, that's number 2. Who's here to speak to the Louisville Metro Department of Health and Wellness? Going once? Going
We
twice?
have Dr. Leslie Wolf and Rebecca Hollenbach.
There we go. The floor is yours. Please announce your name for the record and then proceed.
My name is Dr. Leslie Wolf. I'm the laboratory director for Louisville Metro Public Health and Wellness. I am here to explain the capital purchase. It's from Life Technologies. It's a real-time PCR instrument that we need to be able to run the new CDC SARS coronavirus flu PCR assay. The one we have been using since the beginning of the pandemic, they have discontinued it, and this is the only platform that we can run the approved CDC assay on for SARS coronavirus 2 and the flu assay. So we're requesting purchase of this instrument.
First time he said no. This is a resolution asking or allowing for a voice vote. All those in
You have
favor?
Councilwoman Purvis in queue.
There we go. Councilwoman Purvis? Councilwoman Purvis, I see you in queue, but your camera will need to be on officially for the record. There we go.
Can you see me? I'm sorry, I understand. Can you see me?
Yes, ma'am, we can.
I just had a question. Will this testing, will it also allow to pick up the new viruses that are for the doctor? Would this new testing pick up the new viruses that are now been out as part of COVID?
Yes, ma'am. So the way the CDC has set up this assay, it's actually detecting the nucleocapsid rather than the spike protein. And so the spike protein is where most of the mutations are occurring that are of concern. So yes, this assay will detect the variants that we know about at this point.
Okay. And is this a rapid test?
No, this is a laboratory-based test, so it's actually using nucleic acid amplification technology, so it's the most sensitive and specific assay.
So what is the time frame for the results?
Typically, once we get it on, it's about a 4-hour test, so same day results.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I just want to make note that Councilman Benson and Councilman Mulvihill have joined us. I will ask one additional question to piggyback on Councilwoman Purvis. The wait period, that's often associated with the volume of tests needing to be read, not necessarily the timing in which the machinery takes to actually read the test. Is that what we're finding when we see the 3 to 5 day wait period for PCR?
Yes, I mean, I can only speak to our laboratory, and so our laboratory does not have a 3 to 5 day turnaround time. Our volume is well suited to the instrument that we're going to purchase, so we should still be able to maintain that same day turnaround time.
Is the public able to access the health department for various tests versus Typically, I know the 3 to 5 day wait period still exists for U of L, Norton. So is the public able to access this through the health department, or is this for a segment of the population?
This is for a segment of the population that's not covered by the private sector. And so we have specific partners, such as Louisville Metro Corrections, our community outreach, trying to reach those underserved populations in certain zip codes where there's either high rates of new cases or low vaccination rates. And so we've partnered with for example, the Kentucky Nurses Association, to go out and do these outreach events. And so these are the PCR tests that we're doing to support the community.
Thank you. I just wanted to add that clarification around typical turnaround times. That's important. And thank you,
Yes.
Councilwoman Purvis, for asking that question. Are there any other questions? Did anyone not get in the queue? Going once, twice, 3 times? All right, this is a resolution allowing for a voice vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, Madam Clerk, would you please move this to consent and read item number 2 into the record for me, please?
Item number 2 is R-150-21, a resolution pursuant to the capital and operating budget ordinances approving the appropriation to fund contract for the Louisville Zoo concerning an animatronic insect display.
Hi, this is Stephanie Moore, Assistant Director of the Louisville Zoo.
Thank you. Proceed.
Just to talk about some of the insects that will be in front of this exhibit will be giant dragonflies eating mosquitoes, giant ladybugs eating aphids, monarch butterflies, bees. Talk about the benefits of insects to the public or to our community, and have an attraction for our guests at the zoo for the summertime. This will be featured June through September of next year.
I see one person in the queue, Councilwoman Holton Stewart.
Thanks, Chair Dorsey. I just had a quick question for Stephanie. Thanks for everything that you do at the zoo. My question is, last year with the dinosaur exhibit, did you get a pretty good return on that investment?
We did. We had great attendance. It opened in mid-June and went through mid-September. We did see an increase in our attendance, especially in July and September, right before that closed. Our paid attendance, which is how this is primarily funded, we are on dynamic pricing, so we have different pricing depending on when you buy your ticket. And so during the time frame of this event, our paid attendance price is a little bit higher to cover the cost of this exhibit, and we saw a great return on that investment.
Councilwoman Stewart, are you good?
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions? All right, this is a resolution allowing for a voice vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I'm sorry, this is Sonia Harwood, the clerk. I just want to bring, note that there is an updated contract that was attached as the last item on the agenda. Thank you.
Yes, my apologies. There was a slight change in some of the insurance terms that risk management wanted to add. Otherwise, the terms of the contract did not change.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? All right, this is a resolution allowing for a voice vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed? Resolution passes. Madam Clerk, please move this to consent and proceed with reading item number 3 into the record. Thank you.
Item number 3 is R-160-21, a resolution ratifying and approving a collective bargaining agreement through June 30th, 2023, relating to wages, benefits, and other terms and conditions of employment between Louisville Jefferson County Metro Government and the River City Fraternal Order of Police, Lodge Number 614, Police Officers and Sergeants. Read in full.
Motion Winkler.
Second Piagentini.
We have a motion and a second. The item is before us. Who do I have here to introduce the item? Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Monica Harmon with Office of Management Budget. Thank you, Chairman Dorsey. I'm here to speak to the economic points of the agreement. Chief Erica Shields is also present and will be available to speak on any of the substance of the contract. This agreement covers approximately 1,250 positions, officers and sergeants in the LMPD. This meets the objectives of the administration that is in line with the projected revenue growth over the life of the contract. It is a 2-year contract covering fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23. It includes COLAs and steps in fiscal year 22 of 9% wage increases, and in 23 a 6% wage increase. The economic changes include an additional compensation when forced to perform overtime in excess of 16 hours, greater reimbursement of members' personal property losses from $400 to $1,000, and greater benefits of maternity and paternity leave, which are offered under the Metro Council Ordinance 35014. Cumulative compensation is 19.2%, with the total cost of the contract without fringes at $143.2 million, and with fringes $221.6 million. The votes came out 66% in favor of the passage of the tentative agreement, and 34% voted against it. The membership when voting for this was provided a new tool that was to calculate their back pay based on the terms of the tentative agreement. There was a coding error in the tool which overestimated their base pay for the 11-week period that they were looking back at. The error was not detected until the 5th and final day, with only 3 hours remaining in the voting period. The mayor was notified upon learning the error and directed me to determine the cost of the error, which was $2.6 million, including fringes. The pay to the members is this differential that would occurred because of the error in the tool. This error was caused by OMB, and I'm the responsible party for this mistake. And I regret the mistake and will be sure that further controls are placed in to avoid this in the future. Again, this was a new tool that we provided that was an advantage for the voting membership to see how their pay was gonna change. This will be a one-time payment that we will make to these to correct their situation as they understood it to be when it wasn't in fact that case. And the administration recognizes that the voting members relied on this, and thus we want to compensate them as such. Due to this error, it is eligible under our errors and admissions insurance in our self-insurance risk fund, and the county attorney has affirmed that this is a correct action to rely on. The estimated payment that the individuals will receive, it ranges from approximately $1,800 to $2,500, depending on the years of service in the LMPD. And this represents 1.1% of the contract cost. I'm available to answer any questions that you may have on this, the economic terms and this mistake.
Thank you, Ms. Is it Monica?
Monica.
Thank you, Monica. I do have some folks in the queue, but I'm pretty sure that we will come back to that.
Sure.
Is there anyone else, Chief Shields or Matt, do you want to speak before I get to the questions specifically in the queue? Okay. Let's go ahead and get started. Councilwoman Holton Stewart and then Councilwoman Purvis.
I'm sorry, that was from the last topic, the last resolution.
Thank you. Councilwoman Purvis.
Yes, ma'am. I just had some basic questions after looking at the contract. I was looking at page 51, number 7, and it's talking about and I wanted to know, is there an option for the type of test that they can have if they're going to be called into testing? And I'm thinking this is related to drug. I only wrote down my question, so I'm sorry in addition to a few other questions. So are the members, are the officers given an option to what type of testing that they're gonna have? If you have a new way of testing, do they have the option of saying they want a certain type of test?
Hi, my name is Matt Golden. With regard to the test, so compulsory alcohol testing, Councilwoman, is that what you're referring to?
I was reading it and it was saying if that method of testing is replaced by another method, it was something in reference to the officer could, Matt, Mr. Golden, I'm sorry, I apologize. I have a little bitty index card that I wrote my questions on, so I was just reading that and I noted that down is an option for testing. That's why I quoted the page 51, number 7.
Yeah.
If you're not
Councilwoman,
prepared-
and I apologize, I just have the strike-throughs on here. I can tell you in general that the goal of the compulsory alcohol testing, which is a new addition to this contract so that the chief can direct compulsory alcohol testing after a critical incident, was to give the chief latitude and discretion for that process. I can't answer your specific question, but obviously you can email me, and I will be sure to try to grab that up in a reasonable time.
Okay. My next question is, does an officer have the right to deny or to refuse to be tested?
So there are some refusal provisions in there, but that refusal provision can be treated as such and be disciplined in the
Okay.
compulsory testing.
And what is the time frame, if an officer is involved in an incident, what is the time frame for testing that officer?
I apologize, I'm gonna have to go back and take a pretty close look at that, but ideally, the critical incident testing, the alcohol testing, and not sort of the randomized testing that would exist, it exists within the chief's discretion. It's pretty shortly thereafter, and says wherever possible, post-critical incident alcohol testing shall be conducted within 2 hours of the incident and shall be conducted at the scene of the critical incident. And then that sort of flows from there in that article.
Okay. Okay. And then in reading Article 39, it mentions that an officer has to volunteer, I think, 2 hours per pay period over the time. And I just wanted to know, is this been monitored? And what are the consequences for not keeping, for not upholding this volunteer agreement?
So there are no consequences. I would stress that this is part of the Breonna Taylor settlement negotiations to direct some community volunteerism. And what the provision says is LMPD officers are encouraged to volunteer 2 hours per pay period at their regular work shift at an organization in the community they serve. Obviously, this would be a newer provision, I believe, under this contract. It's an addition. So it would not have been tracked at that point. I presume that there may be policies that would flow from that, Chief, I don't know if you want to address, but I believe this is a new provision.
So it's encouraged but not mandated?
Yeah, we can't compel work.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam
Yes, ma'am.
Chair.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else in the queue, so I'm going to get started with this litany. Chief or anyone, would someone be able to come and explain for us as well as the public one of the most vital pieces I keep hearing, which is the retention policy around informal complaints and how that works as far as the chief being able to investigate that at your own discretion or not. And then, so that's the first part of that. And the second piece is, how does this potentially impact the DOJ's what could come down, as a consent decree, and what we've seen in other cities as far as the DOJ not necessarily being able to fully enact, or the government being able to fully enact a consent decree because of the contract. And we've seen that previously. The reason why this is important is because we as a council have been presented with a preemptive plan to look at a lot of the things that we know the DOJ has investigated in the past. and that will cost us a significant dollar amount. I would not want us to go down that pathway only to find out later on that we passed a contract that inhibited us from enacting or implementing an early detection system that does not have good teeth because of the short runway of the retention of those informal complaints. So would you be able to walk us as a public, or Matt or Chief, whoever could do it best, but if you could walk us through that, or even Ryan, you know, whoever's best to be able to do that, walk the public through that.
Councilman, it's Matt Golden. Number one, the current policy schedule is that the records would be destroyed after 90 days. That's where we are today. That there's a compelled destruction of these informal complaints under the present contract. So it's essential that to management that was addressed, and it is addressed in this contract, to place it in the record retention schedule. So you brought up a very interesting point about the Department of Justice. Let me stress that the Department of Justice is here. Ed Harness from the Inspector General has now been welcomed to our city. The Civilian Review Board is setting itself up. We have Hillard Hines recommendations, and the chief is setting up a new Accountability and Improvement Bureau all at the same time. Every one of those stakeholders will likely want to have a say in retention schedules, and the chief can talk about that. So ideally, having a time limitations outside the contract allows that freedom. As you correctly pointed out, if you put limitations in a contract, it's difficult for the federal government to impair contracts under law. So this allows some additional freedom down the road to address changes that the DOJ may want. They may compel, greater retentions down the road, and this allows that input. Chief, you may want to address how you see retention schedules being addressed by all these folks down the road.
And Matt, can I ask you one more question before Chief comes?
Yes, ma'am.
Did the Hilliard-Hines report specifically address retention, and was this their recommendation or within the parameters of their recommendation?
So I don't believe that they address retention schedule, but it's been a while since I looked at it, so I can't say for sure. But I do believe that they addressed complaint processes, and they addressed early intervention systems, and they addressed the way that these things are going to be handled. So my guess is this is part and parcel to that, how complaints and informal complaints are handled. But I'd also stress to you that some of these informal complaints, they may be unsubstantiated. And so that's something that may end up in an EIS system that's a little bit different. So that retention schedule language gives the administration and the chief a lot of freedom on how those documents are going to be kept down the road. Chief?
Thank you, Matt.
Erica Shields, Chief of Police, LMPD. Thank you for having me. So the contract will better align, the contract being presented will better align the department with what the city's retention schedule is. And I think, when you're looking at patterns, when you're trying to, whether it's disciplinary or to provide intervention, counseling, what have you, you have to have a picture in front of you. And so if you're destroying records at a rapid pace, you're not going to be able to see that. So I think that this contract allows us to better position ourselves so we can see where there are patterns in behavior. What I'll say to you is when I look at just on my career, which has spanned over 25 years, whenever an employee really would get in trouble, would do something egregious, that was one of the things that I always would look at is was there a pattern, was there a behavior, was there an indicator? And most often, and I think this is going to apply to LMPD, there are signs, there are files, and really the breakdown becomes with lack of supervision, lack of accountability, and that starts at my level. So I think a lot of the criticisms that have been brought forward against LMPD over the last few years, you'll find there was documentation. This was not, these incidents were not unknown to some individuals. It's whether or not people in a position of authority did what they needed to do.
Chief, I first want to thank you for that, because I will tell you this council voted no confidence and the previous chief, and a lot of what we are asking the public, which I have stated on the record, I think this is a good contract. We just heard Matt Golden say, we're going from 90 days to 2 years. I think what I want this community to understand on both sides is we have a segment of this community that is completely petrified of the police, and it is because of what you talked about. And so what we're asking is for them to trust us based upon new leadership, but that doesn't mean that their experiences and the trauma that the community has faced has been eradicated, erased, and or even addressed. So I want both organizations to understand why there's that push and pull, even
Sure.
though as an academic and Councilwoman Dorsey, I've spent time reading this contract and I got all kind of notes, but the average lay person does not understand
Right.
it. So it is important that I use this platform to make sure that the public understands these components. So I thank you for doing that. I have one more question, and I see Councilman Mulvihill. I'm going to abdicate and then ask more questions. I'm going to ask you a very direct question. You're a former police chief in Atlanta, which has a very minor or a high minority population. Traditionally, #1 on the Kerner report from the 60s, the #1 issue was police practices within minority communities. We have a majority police department, and even within this contract, I didn't mean to laugh, but I laugh because often it represents or references the chief as his. We don't even put him and her, which means that even a woman like you wasn't considered when the original contract was written because it still refers to a man. We have a 90% male police force. How do you plan to intend to exact trust, recreate, reestablish in whatever mechanisms in minority communities, because you have that experience? Secondly, how do you intend to do that on the force? And I was reading the recruitment policy in which you have specific leeway to bring on folks. How do you plan on diversifying the police department, and how do you plan on reestablishing trust specifically within minority African American communities?
No, I mean, you're spot on, and I think that's the Achilles heel for so many agencies. So LMPD is about 15% female and about 15% African American, and in a community that's probably got about 25% African American. And what I will say to you is, when you look at misconduct, police misconduct, and having come from a city that was 55% African American and a police department 58% African American, I will tell you the misconduct issues tend to be a result of the police culture, not so much the race of the employee. But the difference is, if you have a more diverse department, a lot of those behaviors get weeded out before they become problems in the community. And so when I look at LMPD, probably the greatest disservice that was done to this department over the last decade was that the leadership was not intentional in its hiring. You simply have to have greater diversity within law enforcement so that you can address some of the inherent biases and discriminatory behaviors internally so they're not taken out on the community. And we're behind the 8 ball there, absolutely. So from us, from a recruiting platform, it's being very deliberate about where we're recruiting and who we're recruiting. The difficulty is we're in a space now where no one wants to police. They just don't want to police, and this is across the country. That being said, that's not going to stop us from moving forward. It's identifying, for me, of course we would go to schools that are HBCUs. We would go to cities that have large urban populations, especially if they're defunding or they're not investing in their law enforcement agencies. I have to have greater diversity. I have to have greater diversity so that from day one, when the recruits come into a recruit class, they're sitting with individuals who are not like them. So they start to think differently. Conversations about race within my previous employment and previous department were very open. It is a posture I've adopted here. It's not always gone well. It's not always gone well with the black community here. But the reality of it is you have to call out behaviors and you have to call out racial racial conflicts, racial biases, and just racial lack of awareness if we're ever going to get beyond this. And I think we have our work ahead of us, but the upside of it is this contract at least puts us on competitive footing in the recruitment space, in the salary space. Because right now, that's the greatest challenge, is if we can't even recruit in our own footprint, it's like sports, right? I mean, if you're going to succeed as a coach, you better at least be able to tie down the recruits that are in state. And we haven't even been in that space because of the salary. So this contract affords us to start going in the correct direction, but yes, we have a lot of work ahead of us.
I have one more question in that before we get to the community. Do you feel as though Article 10, Section 3, this highly sensitive position, where it says the chief reserves the right to appoint members to the following highly sensitive positions without posting vacancy, not on the basis of seniority or interviews, public information officer, public integrity unit, professional standards, administrative assistants or assistants for the chief, chiefs of legal staff, legal advisor, or any other newly created sensitive positions as designated by the chief. This will only be done in special circumstances. That limits you to how you can recruit specifically in certain areas. Do you feel within this contract, because I don't see diversity addressed within here, and that was a red flag for me. So do you feel within this contract that you have the ability to specifically recruit African Americans to diversify? And I asked the question previously of a senior officer, which I won't name, which is, how did you become an African American officer? And that was under a consent decree previously. So do you feel that you have that ability when we had a previous consent decree that meant that we had to hire African American officers? We don't know what it will look like in the future, but I still don't see that diversity measure listed anywhere in this contract. Do you feel you have what you need, Chief, in all honesty, to be able to recruit and to target a group that is underrepresented based upon this contract without conflicting with the seniority clauses?
Right, so just so we're clear on this, the seniority clauses are apply to people who already work here.
Okay.
So what that is saying is so let's just say it's myself and Matt Golden, and we're both vying for a position over the homicide unit. Here's where I found that has hamstrung me. I come in and let's say that the homicide unit director, I think they're underperforming, which I'm using him because I think Lieutenant Burbrink does a phenomenal job. I think he's confident enough to know that. So let's say I come in and I think that he's underperforming. Where that limits me is I can't just move him out and put someone in there that I feel has the attributes necessary to improve performance. I am limited by that contract. Personnel moves are they are tied to seniority to a point. If the lieutenant's position in homicide comes open today, what's incumbent is that the interview process is fair. And that has not been the case. And I've heard that loudly from the African American employees, that how is it that he and I are both interviewing and I'm clearly the more qualified candidate and I come out fifth and the four people in front of me may all be male, let's say. And so one of the things that we have done is Colonel Gwynn and myself have worked with Lieutenant Edelin in the back to ensure that we have a uniform interview process across the table. So whether you're interviewing to be a detective here or over there, the process is the same. Also, the list that ranks you has to come through to my office, because I do think that there has been in the past, I mean, clearly I've heard it loudly, and you can look in the landscape, individuals have been passed over for the wrong reasons. So that applies to what you're referencing. In terms of the recruitment piece, no, there is nothing in there per se that says you must hire 15% of your hirees in 2022 must be African American. I agree with you. It is not stated there. That being said, it goes without saying, anyone who is standing here, if they are not prioritizing hiring diversity, they have no business standing here. I think the Mayor's Office of Equity, they do incorporate that in some of our benchmarks. To me, if I will not have a problem hiring African Americans or any other minorities for that matter if we can get to a space where people even want to police. Right now, my obstacle is people just don't want to police. And it's not just here, but you have to be deliberate in your recruitment and you have to be deliberate in your hiring, certainly.
Thank you for that.
That's a long answer. I
It
hope I've
is.
not totally confused you. And if I have, just let me know and I'll try to clean it up a bit.
It's fine. The last segment of this, and then I'm tossing it to Councilman Mulvihill, is how are you going to deal with the community aspect of a lack of diversity and what that has led to and what that really looks like when, to your point, if you have a lack of people that are interested, we kind of get what we get. But that means that we're getting people who may have limited cultural experiences. And I'm going to reflect on something that was said maybe a few nights ago when the old LA Fitness was shot up across from Whole Foods. The police chief or the spokesman for St. Matthews literally said on camera, but traditionally this happens in the West End, right? So the connotation has been the West End, which has really been a dog whistle for black.
Right.
Because in a city that is still highly segregated,
Right.
what we're really saying is we only expect for crime to happen around and in black communities.
Right.
That's what was really said, if we're being honest with each other, right? So how do we deal with the culture of a police force that really is reflective of a community that has a mentality that crime only happens in the West? And that's oftentimes, that connotation really means black. And what we as black people have experienced in Louisville, Kentucky with the police force, which is oftentimes or probably the reason why we've had the DOJ here back in the 80s or in the early 90s and why they're back now. How do you plan on addressing this issue with the community?
No, and I appreciate your comments because it is what I speak to when I'm out, and that is my issue is not just a police issue. It's reflective of the community and how communities think. Obviously, there is that unspoken term, these words, even if it was spoken more directly in that soundbite, that there are certain behaviors associated with certain colors. That is a societal problem. It's a huge one. And I will say that the issues that I have apply to every employer. And I ask, when I speak publicly, I ask every employer, look at the structure. Look at how you are empowering your minorities. Most are not. So what I have to do is I have to look at, again, I have to make sure that my people are aware of their behaviors and they're held accountable. But what I will say to you again, most of the time when you are looking at behaviors in black community that are so damaging and unconstitutional, it's the behavior of the individual that's driven more from the police culture than it is for, if there's a level of tolerance in the police culture or in that particular supervision. I think that when you start tracing behaviors, you can see that there were the flags where these matters had to be addressed and they were not. So for me, it's sending the message to the troops, to this department, these are my expectations, but also holding the people at the top accountable. It's not adequate to just start disciplining from the bottom up. It's how are we running things from the top. The trust in the community, unfortunately, I wish there was a quick fix, but that's unreasonable. We're just going to have to go out there and perform day in and day out in a manner that is consistent with what the community expects and needs from us. I wish there was a quicker fix, but I will tell you, I have many people here, many of them who are white, who really, really want the community to take pride in them. They want to get it correct. And they just want to know what is the direction we're going in. And so I think it's really important to understand there's a lot of good people in this department, black, white, or otherwise, and they just want to do the job in a manner that the Louisville Metro is proud of them.
Thank you, Chief. And
Yes,
I want
ma'am.
to thank you personally for doing this for the community and anyone who's going to play this back, because it's not just for me, but it's about the people who need to hear this to trust you. Councilman Mulvihill, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Chief, for being here. My questions are brief.
throughout the contract, it refers to 67C because either that's the floor or the dictate standards or processes are sort of handed down from statute, and we have to incorporate them and follow them. In your other previous positions, is that something you're accustomed to, that your sort of state law sort of sets the standards and then things can be changed? And the other question I'd ask, with what we have here in Kentucky and specifically in 67C, if you find any of those provisions who, happen to be hindrances in what you're able to do or what you're able to negotiate or contract, is there going to be some effort either this session or in upcoming legislative sessions to make some changes? So I hope
No.
that's a long-winded question, but it's, hope you understood it. If not,
No,
I'll
you're
clarify.
you're spot on. Thank you, Councilman. No, I'm not accustomed to having the state try to run local agencies. And I think that's one of the big hindrances here is when I look at the state law, it feels multiple components of 67C work well with a small agency, but they don't apply to larger agencies. The Merit Board is a prime example. You have to be, the entire structure of it defies working sense. So there are things within the state, and I just think there's just such a, and my understanding is that it was a large part of this resulted from the merger, that maybe it was the common ground, how they could strike a common ground, but I really feel as though, particularly in this day and age where things are changing so rapidly in law enforcement, particularly in urban communities, it's imperative that police leadership have the latitude to be able to pivot and make some critical improvements. Our job is very different from those individuals in other parts of the state. And so I think there's a lot of room for negotiation and improvement. And it's important to note that by saying improvement and change, it's not anti-police or anti-cop. It just better fits the constituency and the demands, the working demands on our agency. When you look at these officers and they don't get the discipline, they don't hear anything about their discipline file for years. There's a portion of it absolutely that falls on the chief's office, but a large portion of it falls on the Merit Board construct. I mean, that doesn't do the employees a service, so, or the community for that matter. So I do know that we're trying to tackle a few of the issues. I think it's like everything else in the country right now. If we can get beyond the point of everything being politicized and just take a practical approach, we could actually make some inroads.
Comments. I think most of us felt like, at least last year, there was at least a provision, there's probably multiple provisions, that we were all directly impacted, that we couldn't comment on a pending investigation because that's part of the Bill of Rights, and I don't think anybody was aware that we couldn't. So I do know in your job, it's probably a lot more frustrating, but even many of us on the council were not able to comment on things, and we were surprised by that. So if you are going to have bills or things, I'm sure there will be members of the council, maybe all of us, that might want to make at least changes, especially in a provision such as that. But thank you for your time. Keep up the good work. Thank you.
Chief, I have one more person in the queue. I will ask you one question preemptively of him. We went from 90 days to 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have an early warning system yet. What is the timeline or what is your intention around standing up an early warning system within LMPD?
Thank you. So we're actually running a pilot on the early intervention system in a couple of the divisions. So it's in progress. We wanted to, so it really requires the supervisors to daily be looking at any potential red flags that have arisen. And what I didn't want to do is just roll out something that just to check a box. And one of the things that you find when you research early intervention systems and you look nationally, there's not a lot of good ones out there. A lot of people talk, they huff about it and what they got and the miracles that they're doing, but it's like, okay, well, if that's the case, why do you still have the issues you have? There just has not been the level of investment and scrutiny on employee behaviors pre-discipline that there needs to be. We're going to get there nationally because the energy is there. So the guys in LMPD have done a really good job of trying to put together a system that's actually purposeful. We've got the pilot going in a couple of divisions. And I hope that by the beginning of the new year, we can have it in every division. I'm aware there's going to have to be modifications and improvements. The technology around early intervention systems is not where it needs to be nationally. There's not, and if someone comes in here and wants to sell you something for $1 million, don't do it. It's just one of those things that we're getting to a space where there will be the energy around employee behavior that there is around crime data. And once we have that level of technology and focus on employee behaviors that we have on crime, we'll be in a much better place. LMPD is doing good in this area in terms of being forward-thinking and developing it, but it's going to be, it'll be a while before I think it's hitting the benchmarks that we want. But the short answer to a long answer is the pilot's in 2 divisions, and I hope by the beginning of the year we can at least be having some formation of it operational in every division.
I'm just going to say this, and I'm going to toss the ball to Councilman Piagentini, and I'm going to be quiet because there are more questions I have between now and council meeting that I want to answer. Ryan, Chief, we're dependent on you. We can't take any more. And I'm talking as a black woman who's lived in West Louisville, who was outside with the protests, who've talked to African Americans who came on board as a result of Shelby Lanier. We are dependent on you. We're dependent on you to keep your word and your leadership to us. Ryan, I talked to you. It's the first time I ever talked to a leader from the FOP. And I commit to fostering a relationship with you. And thank you for that. Because what I realize is it's going to take me being uncomfortable and all of us being uncomfortable till we get to a place. But you all lead. And Ryan leads and influences in ways that you can, and you lead and influences in ways that he can't. But we are depending on you. This contract will pass. It has the votes and it has the support. But what we are depending on and it will pass is because these 26 members have faith that you all will do what you need to do to make this work for our city. And for no other reason will it pass other than that. But we are depending on you after the passage to make this work for us because we can't take anything else. We will be factioned and we will be broken. And I hope everyone in this room understands that if that happens, the city will be torn in a way that may be irreversible. So we need you all to step up and to adhere to your word on this because we can't take anything else. Councilman Piagentini.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well said. I think we have debated this extensively. I think we've had some good discussion here, actually not related to the contract specifically, which is always welcome, of course. But at this point, I'm going to make a motion to call the question.
Thank you. I don't see anyone else in the queue. So
Second.
I think we
Second.
will vote on first calling the question, and then we will call, but I think we're ready to vote regardless. So let's vote. Let's move forward with voting on calling the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. I don't think we need a roll call.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, I didn't see anyone else in the queue. So we are ready for the question. Madam Clerk, could you make this a roll call?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Chair Dorsey,
Present.
Vice Chair Piagentini,
Yes.
Committee Member Purvis,
Present.
Committee Member Mulvihill,
Yes.
Committee Member Winkler,
Yes.
Committee Member Benson,
Yes.
Committee Member Holton Stewart.
Yes.
Madam Chair, you have 5 yes votes and 2 present.
Please move this to old business. I do know there are a few questions that are still out there lingering, so we do hope to connect. But thank you all, everyone, for coming. I appreciate your time. We have 5 minutes. If we could move to the fourth. Oh. Number 4? So we can skip it. Okay. I do see Councilman Arthur on. If we're ready to start the discussion of number 5, we can. I don't know that we'll get through it in 5 minutes. I don't think we have the time. Is anyone here to discuss item 5? You are, okay. Come forward. Madam Clerk, would you read item number 5 into the record for me, please?
Item number 5 is O-642-21, an ordinance